Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Horror Mine. My name is Vic Shy, and this is the Scare Score, where I break down horror movies and rate them on how scary I think they are. In this episode, I'll be going over the 2003 South Korean horror film, A Tale of Two Sisters. I'll be going over the events that take place throughout the film while breaking down each scare scene and rating them on how scary they are or attempt to be. I consider A Tale of Two Sisters to be an overlooked classic of the Asian horror movie genre, but how scary is it? Sit back and relax and join me as we explore A Tale of Two Sisters and tally up the Scare Score. Our movie begins inside of a mental institution as we are introduced to our main character, Soo-mi. She is being interviewed by a doctor who asks about her day and who she thinks she is. He shows her a picture of her family, which gets a slight reaction out of her. He asks her about that day, and the film takes us on an interesting and disturbing journey on how she got to this point. Soo-mi comes home from the institution as we meet her father and the other half of our film's title, her younger sister, Soo-yeon. South Korean films often have beautiful cinematography combined with amazing music, and this film is no different. But not too much now. I don't want to get a copyright claim. Inside the house, we meet their stepmother, Eunju, who is an absolute Mitch with a B. She immediately comes off as fake and condescending, and it only gets worse. Soo-mi goes into her room to put her things away. When she goes to place her journal on her desk, she oddly finds that the exact same journal is already there. She then goes into her closet and finds it full of clothes. The stepmother prepares the father's clothes, but finds that Soo-mi has already laid out some clothes for him. She gets upset and throws them in the trash. We see the father having a phone conversation with an unknown person and says that things aren't looking so good right now. He says that Sun Kyu and his wife are coming over for dinner before hanging up. They have a pretty quiet, awkward dinner when the stepmother decides to break the silence. She tells the father that she invited Sun Kyu and his wife over for dinner, which is odd because that's exactly what he said on the phone right before dinner. The father goes to bed early and the stepmother shows her true colors. She and Soo-mi start arguing about clothes before the father comes back and gives her two small white pills. Notice that while he gives her the medication, we never actually see her take it. The purpose of the medication isn't revealed until the end, and it's pretty shocking. Soo-mi is very protective of her younger sister because she is soft-spoken and seems easily pushed around by the stepmom. That night, Eunju dolls herself up before getting in bed. The father comes into the room but goes to sleep on the couch in the middle of the night. Eunju is woken up by running footsteps and sits up in bed in a really strange way. Soo-yeon is also woken up by a strange noise and her door slowly opens. A ghostly hand slowly appears and she retreats into her blanket, a defense mechanism that has proven unsuccessful in many previous Asian horror films. The blanket is slowly pulled off of her as the door slams and the footsteps are heard running off. This was a very tame and by-the-book scare scene, but that's okay because it's only the first one. She crawls into bed with Soo-mi and says that someone came into her room. Soo-mi goes downstairs to find the TV turned on showing only static. She finds her father asleep and is confronted by the stepmother who tells her not to wake him. She grabs some water from the fridge and smells something smelly. Thankfully, it's just some stinky fish and not human flesh because I thought they were heading in the cannibal direction for a second. Eunju eerily sits alone in the dark staring at the blank television, showing that there is clearly something wrong with her other than bitchiness. Soo-mi tries comforting her little sister but admits that there is something strange about the house. That morning, Soo-mi has a nightmare possibly involving her younger self and her mother in a forest. She grabs her mother by the arm, which starts to bleed, and she wakes up. I won't claim to fully understand the true meaning or significance of the nightmare, but it may have something to do with the film's somewhat confusing ending. She wakes up to find her sister next to her and a ghost crawling at the edge of her bed. The spirit looks like the typical Asian horror movie woman ghost with long black hair. The spirit moves super slow and her arms are bent sort of like a puppet, which make her seem very creepy looking. The spirit gets on top of the bed as blood and a hand appear down her legs. This was a fairly standard scare scene with a slight disturbing aspect to it. The ghost is absolutely textbook but still manages to look scary. The only thing I don't like about this scene is that it was a nightmare sequence. I think that nightmare sequences in horror films can sometimes be cheap. If this hadn't been a nightmare sequence, it would have been way scarier. She realizes that Soo-yeon is on her cycle and the stepmother laughs saying that she is too. This is not just a coincidence. We get a sweet moment between the two sisters where Soo-mi tries teaching Soo-yeon how to whistle but she struggles.
Like this?
They are sitting underneath a birdcage with two parakeets that the stepmom loves. Sumi jokes about harming them, but Sooyeon says that they should set them free. Their father shows up and says that Sumi looks a little sick. She says she's fine, but asks him to get rid of the closet in Sooyeon's room. He reminds her that they promised not to speak about that closet. Sumi is clearly angry with her father because of the stepmother, who has been a negative influence on the entire house. Sumi grabs some of her mother's things out of storage and finds several pictures of her. She sees the stepmother in some of those pictures, which really upsets her. Eunju used to be the nurse that took care of their terminally ill mom. It's an alarming revelation that becomes even more disturbing once we learn the truth at the end. Sooyeon walks into the room and Sumi notices bruising and cuts on her arm. She aggressively asks if it was the stepmother who hurt her and gets pretty crazy about it. She confronts the stepmother and they both say some pretty despicable things to each other. The father hears everything while shaving in the bathroom but doesn't step in to stop it. Sumi is fuming and at a loss for words, so she knocks over the stepmother's tea. The father finally decides to step out and finds Sumi alone and crying. She feels he is oblivious to everything that's happening in the house and he begs her to tell him what's wrong. He cautions her to stop acting like this or she will get sick again. The next shot of Sumi's face is very haunting and an easily missed visual clue that relates to the film's twist ending. Eunju's brother Sun-kyu and his wife arrive at the house and we are treated to one of the most awkward and intense dinner scenes I have ever seen. Eunju starts to recall a story from her past involving her brother that she thinks is hilarious. What makes the scene awkward? She is the only one laughing awkwardly. I felt secondhand embarrassment just by watching this scene. Sun-kyu says that he doesn't know what the heck she's talking about, which changes the mood from awkward to tense. The father tries setting his wine glass as normally as he can, and Sun-kyu's wife experiences a panic attack from all the tense awkwardness. She falls to the ground screaming and flailing around uncontrollably. Sun-kyu rushes to give her the medication, which causes her to throw up and adds another disturbing layer to this scene. She looks directly under the sink before Eunju screams in terror from what she just witnessed, and quite possibly caused. On the car ride home, Sun-kyu apologizes to his wife and says that the father begged him to come for dinner. The wife looks absolutely terrified and says that she saw a girl underneath the sink. The horrified look on her face says it all. This was a great scare scene, especially since I feel like it came out of nowhere just like an RKO. The scene went from awkward to tense to disturbing and scary in just a matter of minutes. What truly makes this scene great is the brilliant acting on display from everyone involved, especially the two ladies. The stepmother plays the bitchy/crazy role extremely well, and Sun-kyu's wife deserves huge recognition for how brief yet impactful her scene is. The stepmother is left alone in the kitchen and hears a strange noise coming from under the sink. The cabinet opening on its own was her cue to go to bed and never look back, but she decides to investigate. She looks under the sink and soon realizes that there is a little girl sitting at the table. She slowly turns around and finds the girl no longer there. She then finds a hairpin on the ground and is treated to a jump scare when she reaches for it. She quickly turns around and the little girl is directly behind her. This scare scene was a nice little extension to the previous one. Although jump scares aren't really my thing, the aggressiveness of this one actually worked. The film does a good job of using dead silence to its advantage. The silence right before the jump scare helped make it that much more effective. The father gives her the medication and she tries telling him that there is something strange about the house. He dismisses her concerns but says that he'll take a look around. He leaves the room and just like before, we don't see her take the medication. She nervously paces back and forth in the bedroom as the father looks around the house. He looks inside the birdcage and finds one of the parakeets dead and the other missing. He doesn't know that Eunju was spying on him and is now enraged by the death of her bird. She goes into Sooyeon's room and sees that she has been torn out of all the pictures. Her face has also been covered and scratched in black ink. She confronts the sleeping Sooyeon and finds the other dead parakeet underneath her blanket. She yanks Sooyeon off the bed and tosses the pictures of her mom in her face before cruelly locking her inside the closet. She forces her to apologize but keeps her locked up anyways. This scene is hard to watch and shows that there are way scarier things than ghosts in this film. This is also a really emotionally intense moment that the musical score captures perfectly. Sumi finally wakes up because she literally slept throughout that entire scene. She finds Sooyeon locked in the closet and apologizes for not hearing her. She promises her little sister that this will never happen again. This is yet another scene that is much more meaningful come the end of the film. The father comes in and confronts Sumi about her recent behavior. She tells him that the stepmother has been harassing Soo-yeon and locked her in the closet. This is where we get the film's first plot twist. The father reveals that Soo-yeon has been dead the entire time. Sumi looks at her little sister in disbelief and Soo-yeon starts to scream. It's a shocking twist that becomes a tad more confusing later, but let's take a look at the clues I noticed that hinted at this. The first clue we get is at the very beginning of the film. When Sumi comes home with her father, he asks her if she's getting out of the car. He's only speaking to her and no one else because even though we saw them both exit, she was the only one there. This is the case throughout the film. The father never speaks to Soo-yeon directly. I'm very experienced in seeing fathers ignore their kids, and this isn't one of those times. He's not ignoring her, she just doesn't exist. The film even discreetly shows us this when Sumi and her father are talking. The sisters were together in the previous shot, but when the father arrives, the frame purposely cuts off Soo-yeon from the shot. It's very subtle and clever writing and camera work that make this twist more rewarding, although the next twist is even crazier and ties everything up really nicely. The father has another phone conversation and asks the unknown person to come over. He says that Sumi is getting worse and that he can't do this alone. This is most likely the same person he spoke to in the beginning. The stepmother is seen dragging a large bloody potato sack around that leaves a blood trail. She starts beating the bag up more viciously than when Brian owed Stewie some money. Sumi wakes up from another nightmare and goes looking for her sister. She hears her sister calling, and we are treated to a fine example of this film's excellent sound editing. The music stopping right as Sumi stops and notices the blood on the floor is just great. In a truly masterful shot, Sumi slowly follows the blood trail and discovers the bloody bag. It's a beautiful shot that's full of tension as Sumi approaches what she believes to be her dead sister inside of the bag. She freaks out trying to open the bag and visibly starts to lose her mind. She returns to the hallway, but the bag is no longer there. She follows the blood trail to Soo-yeon's closet and finds the bag inside. The stepmother wipes blood off her hands and also seems to have gone off the deep end. Sumi tries cutting the bag open and the stepmother sneaks up behind her holding a boiling pot of water. The two get into a fight where Sumi stabs the stepmother's hand with scissors. It's a gritty fight that ends with Sumi getting knocked out. She drags Sumi downstairs and wonders how everything got to this point. She gives a whole speech about how hard it is to wipe something from your mind because it follows you like a ghost. The stepmother says that she's going to help her and end it all here. She drags in a large statue and holds it over Sumi's face to kill her. However, the father comes home right on time and finds Sumi on the floor with a broken statue next to her. He lays her down on the couch and notices blood on her hand. He grabs a bottle of medication and sees a doll wrapped in a bag inside the closet. He finds the stepmother sitting on the couch in Sumi's place, and this is where the film's true plot twist is finally revealed. She asks where is Sumi, but really needs to ask who is Sumi. They hear a car drive up and someone rings the doorbell. The father steps out and comes back in with the real Eun-ju. The truth is that Sumi was pretending to be Eun-ju this entire time. She was the one who dragged the potato sack across the house, and it actually contained a small doll inside, not Soo-yeon. Sumi was fighting herself and stabbed her own hand, which is a little awkward to try and picture. She has been pretending to be the stepmother the entire time, and all the events in the film have been a figment of her own imagination. In reality, there was no Soo-yeon or Eun-ju. Sumi and her father were alone inside of the house the entire time. This would explain why the stepmother was acknowledging and speaking to Soo-yeon, because it was all in Sumi's mind. One of the first clues hinting that Sumi was possibly an unreliable narrator is when she tried to put away her journal that was already there. I'm not certain what it signifies exactly, but possibly shows that she had already done some things she wasn't aware of. The next odd thing was when the stepmother said she invited Sun-kyu and his wife over for dinner, although in the previous scene, it's clear that it was the father who invited them. Speaking of that scene, it was Eun-ju who the father was speaking to on the phone the entire time. Every time the father gave the stepmom medication, they were actually for Sumi. The reason we never saw the stepmother take the medication is because Sumi was actually the one taking them, though they don't seem to have such a positive effect. Sumi was the one who weirdly got dolled up and got into bed pretending to be Eun-ju, hence the father leaving to sleep on the couch in the middle of the night. The conversation Sumi and the stepmother had that night wasn't odd timing. Sumi made it all up. Soo-yeon and the stepmother having their cycle on the same same day wasn't coincidental. Sumi was actually the one on her cycle for the both of them. The reason the father never stepped in on any of the intense arguments between Sumi and the stepmom was because it was just Sumi arguing with herself and acting crazy. This shot of her face when he confronts her afterwards is possibly a visual representation of her split personality. It literally looks split down the middle between light and dark. Very cool and subtle imagery here. When Sun-kyu and his wife came over for dinner, Sumi was pretending to be Eunju and recalling a story from their past that never existed, which now makes that scene so much more awkward for everyone else involved. But all that doesn't mean that the house isn't actually haunted. Sumi is readmitted into the hospital and Eunju says that she'll visit her often. This is all still just an act because Eunju's face here is full of disgust. Sumi grabs a hold of her arm and it's clear that she still hates her guts. But who exactly is Eunju? Why has she shown up at the end, and why has Sumi imagined her as this evil stepmother who terrorizes her and her sister? Thankfully, we have flashbacks that tell us exactly that. Eunju was the home nurse hired to take care of Sumi and Soo-yeon's terminally ill mother. The girls clearly didn't like her as there was possibly something going on between her and their father. She treated the girls like crap and was especially mean to Soo-yeon, who was soft-spoken and couldn't stand up for herself. The mom also wasn't too fond of Eunju and could see the pain she was causing her daughters. In the hospital, Sumi hears Soo-yeon's spirit whistling, which is also heard by Eunju, along with running footsteps inside the house. She also hears a door slamming shut and heads upstairs. As she walks through the hall, blood can be seen seeping through the floorboard. She goes up into Soo-yeon's room that has been nailed shut the entire film but is now open. She goes into the room that is freezing cold. Something briefly appears behind the curtain and she pulls it back, revealing 4 empty picture frames. The 4 empty picture frames possibly symbolizing the now empty family destroyed at the hands of Eunju. She opens Soo-yeon's closet and we learn that the house has truly been haunted all along. Soo-yeon's ghost emerges from the closet and takes Eunju's life off screen. This is the last of the few horror elements we got and it absolutely delivered. We don't get a whole lot of Soo-yeon as a revengeful spirit here, but the images we do get are terrifying. Seeing her crawl out of the closet along with the horrifying background noises and Eunju's reaction make this an excellent scare scene. What makes this scare scene more effective is because the film doesn't have too many of them. The revelation that the house is actually haunted and seeing Eunju getting her just desserts is also nice. We also had confirmation that the house was haunted because Sun-kyu's wife saw Soo-yeon's ghost underneath the sink during the dinner scene. I also have my own interesting theory on Soo-yeon that sort of diverts from the narrative of Sumi being completely crazy. While it's clear that Sumi made up almost everything about what was taking place in the house, I believe it's possible that she was actually seeing Soo-yeon's ghost as well. The way Soo-yeon reacted to everything that was going on felt like her ghost was actually witnessing everything. This feels especially true when her father revealed that Soo-yeon had been dead all along. Her reaction seems to hint that her spirit hadn't truly accepted the fact that she was dead and had been unable to move on. The spirit that Soo-yeon saw early in the film was possibly her own vengeful spirit or the spirit of her mother. Now that Soo-yeon realizes she's a ghost, she is able to take revenge on Eunju, which seems to put both her and Sumi at peace. Just when I thought the film couldn't hit us with anything more shocking, with less than 10 minutes in the film, the ending proves me totally wrong. Soo-yeon found her deceased mother inside her closet who deleted herself, possibly from the grief of being terminally ill and there having been a possible affair between her husband and Eunju. While trying to save her mom, the closet fell on Soo-yeon and tragically crushed her, a loud noise and scream that was seemingly heard by everyone in the house. However, only Eunju went to go investigate. She walked into the room and saw the injured Soo-yeon struggling underneath the closet. Instead of helping right away, she walked out and came across Sumi. The two exchanged some pretty heated words and Sumi told her to stay out of their lives. Eunju warned her that she might regret this moment. Thanks to that exchange, Eunju decided not to help Soo-yeon and allowed the closet to tragically delete her from existence. The exchange also caused Sumi not to go check on the noise she heard in Soo-yeon's room because of how angry and emotional she was. She stormed out of the house and ignored her father, who was possibly also on his way to investigate the noise. Sumi had been pretending to be a fictionalized version of Eunju, where she was the evil stepmother terrorizing her and her sister. She most likely feels a tremendous amount of guilt for not having gone into her room that day and possibly saving her sister. The earlier scene where Eunju locks Soo-yeon in the closet possibly represents Sumi blaming Eunju for her sister's death. She then apologizes for not having heard her and not being there for her. In reality, she was apologizing for the real event that led to her sister's death. death. These were the events that caused Sumi to go insane and landed her in the hospital. In the film's final scene, Sumi walks away from the house as Unju watches her with the knowledge of what just happened. Soo-yeon calls out to Sumi for help and passes away underneath the closet. Sumi turns away from the house one more time, unaware that her entire life has changed for the worse as the movie ends. The film's end credits show Sumi sitting on the dock at the lake, the exact same shot as the beginning of the film, only without Soo-yeon. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was A Tale of Two Sisters. My friends, this was an excellent film and a true underrated classic of the Asian horror movie genre. The dramatic beats fit so well with the psychological aspects of this crazy story. The story is written and told expertly, and the film feels very engaging the entire time. There is a very mysterious and surreal undertone throughout the film that made me question everything that was going on right until the very end. The direction, musical score, cinematography, and acting are all top-notch and are a perfect example of why I love South Korean cinema. With all that said, however, this is the scare score, and this film isn't very scary, at least not in the traditional sense that horror movie fans may be used to. This film is very much a psychological drama with horror elements sprinkled throughout. Some of the horror scenes are pretty standard but feel more effective because they are so few and far between. And that's absolutely fine because this film knows exactly what it's trying to accomplish and does it very well, earning A Tale of Two Sisters a not so terrifying scare score of 38%. I don't want anyone to see the low scare score and think that this is a bad horror movie. A Tale of Two Sisters is an excellent horror film that is an absolutely underrated classic of the Asian horror movie genre, and I highly recommend this film to any horror fan. The scariest scene in the film was Unju's death. After all the crazy twists and reveals, finally learning that the house truly is haunted was scary and oddly satisfying. In a film with very few of them, this was an excellently crafted scare scene that more than justifies this movie being categorized as a horror movie. But as always, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you all for tuning in, and I cannot wait to see y'all right back here in the horror mine. Y'all stick around.